I can't start yet. It's only 7:59 and 32 seconds. You know the clock which I like the most? It's a clock inside that walking meditation hall. You seen that clock? It's always on, was it 10 past 10 or 20? Is it 10 past 10? That one? 10 past 10, yes. It hasn't moved for about 4 or 5 years. That's when you can really become still. Always make sure that the clock was stuck on some time before noon. You know, we have our rules for monks and nuns. We have to finish eating before noon. And the definition of noon, for the monastic sangha, is like halfway between sunrise and sunset. So what happens when you go to inside the Arctic Circle? In the Arctic Circle, the sun doesn't rise. The sun doesn't set. It just goes round and round and round. So that's why a few monks are really interested in starting a monastery in Finland. So they can actually eat for 3 months. And after the 3 months, they go somewhere else, go down south to Antarctica, and then they can eat for another 3 months. Of course you don't mess around like that. But sometimes, when you look at sometimes the interesting stuff of life, so sometimes you have some really good fun. Just like the other thing which I notice, that sometimes when you go traveling to different airports, and it's difficult being a monk, okay. When I go to the airports, and some of them have the instructions in English, and some have all the instructions in the local language, in the local sort of symbols and letters, which I don't understand. So I always have difficulty when I try to find a toilet. I don't understand the words, but I look at the figures on the outside. And I look at my figure. I once had this, I'll do the real talk in a moment. When I like telling people that once I had this really prestigious invitation to a national federal dinner, Commonwealth dinner in Parliament House with Queen Elizabeth. I thought, wow, this is interesting. They don't give you much warning, for security reasons. And it said, Ajahn Brahm plus partner. So I had to get someone pretty quickly, and it was in Canberra. So, you know who I invited? Ajahn Sujato. He was in that area, he was over in Sydney. And I remember when I invited him, he said, whatever it is, I can't go. I've got a dentist appointment that day. And he actually rang his dentist, and he asked the dentist, he said, can I cancel the appointment? You know what it's like with dentists? They said, look, I've made this special appointment for you this day. I can't cancel, it's just difficult. It has to be a really special invitation. I remember Ajahn Sujato said it was with Queen Elizabeth. And the dentist said, okay. But my problem was, well, you may ask about the dinner. What's Ajahn Brahm going to a dinner for? You can't eat anything. But I must admit that there are things like protocol officers, and if I wore a beanie, I'd take my beanie off to this protocol officer, Because whoever it was, they did their research so well. It was like a 3-course meal. You know what my first course of meal was? Cheese. Had to be Australian cheese, some Aussie cheese somewhere. And my second course meal was a different part of cheese. So I had cheese for the first course, cheese for the second course. And for the third course? Dark chocolate, yeah. I couldn't really believe it. And it was really good quality as well. So, but in these things you spend too much time talking. But the difficulty was, the real difficulty was not the menu, it was on this invitation, was the dress code. I'm sure you've heard this story so many times, but I just love saying it, so please indulge me. You do anyway, you've got no choice. The dress code. And the first choice on this dress code, it's a really big event, was black tie. Now look, I don't go to these things, I haven't got a clue what's going on. And so I asked, the people who are supposed to know, is that all you're supposed to wear? Just a tie and nothing else? This is really weird. No, a black tie is like code. A tie and a shirt and trousers and a jacket. We don't have one. I don't think in Bodhinyana monastery, I don't think there's any jacket or black tie anywhere in that monastery. So I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be difficult. And the next choice number 2, military uniform. I'm a pacifist. You can't have a monk dressing up as a military uniform, in a military uniform. So I thought, there's not going to be much chance of me going. And the third choice, yes. It was a choice I could actually accept and wear. Long dress. Well, it looks like long dress, doesn't it? So I remember going under long dress. And I remember just when I got there, of course there's all sorts of security. And I remember this security officer coming up and she said to me, "Are you supposed to be here?" And I was tempted to say, first of all, who do you mean as you? But it's actually you. Is it just which kanda in particular? But I realised I'd probably get put in jail if I started messing around there. So I just had the invitation, so they let me through. It's nice. I don't know how you feel, but when you don't fit in, and when it's kind of different, I kind of enjoy that. It's just letting go and going beyond boundaries. And that's one of the nice things about being a monk. I still remember one of the first days I came to Perth, and we were already purchased, Bodhinyana monastery land, but we were doing a lot of building. So we had one of these old VW vans and was filling it up with material for the building. And then this girl from next door, maybe 11 or 12 years of age, she came out and she looked at me. And she put her hands on her hips like this. And she said to me, "You're wearing a girl's skirt. That's sick." I laughed much more than you did. I thought it was one of the most funniest things I'd heard all week. And when she was trying to criticize you and put you down and upset you, it's a wonderful response when you just laugh instead. Because if you laugh, it says, number one, that you're immune to criticism, and number two is actually you're doing something which she can see the funny side of that story herself. So anyway, that was my times of being abused. It kind of didn't work. If anybody wants to try any more abuse. But anyhow, the main part of the talk I was going to give this morning was, not just using things like being mindful, actually is part of kindness. And that part of kindness is not having a fault-finding mind. That's what people do in this world. They look at you, instead of trying to understand, why are you wearing these funny coloured clothes? And you're a guy. And we always tend to try and find fault with one another. I don't know, you've been in this retreat centre how many days? If we we haven't done this yet, maybe we should do this, put up a complaints box. Why do you say no? Because it will never be big enough. Somebody did this once, I think in the US, in the retreat centre there. They wanted to make it better, so they put up a complaints box, and it filled up within the morning time. It's very easy to complain. It's very easy to find faults. What faults have you found with Jhana Grove Retreat Centre? Come on. Sometimes you don't tell me because I can see who it is, and you might feel you get banned from the next retreat. The doors are squeaky. It's too hot in here, it's too cold in here. We should have choices so we don't have to stay up late. And we can have Ajahn Brahm telling us what's on the menu of bad jokes tonight, so if you heard them before, you can stay in your room and have a bit of peace and quiet. We can have like a menu. Wouldn't that be nice? Have a menu. What's on the menu for tomorrow, for this afternoon, for lunch today? So you could actually choose. Would that work? Do you know what you're having for lunch today? Maybe afterwards, when you find out, you think it might be a good idea. But a lot of times, that fault-finding mind, you can notice that you find fault with anything, even with something which is very, very beautiful. So that's just the places. Now, what about your meditation? Have you found fault with that? You do that all the time, don't you? That's why you come for interviews and write questions in the box. There's something about us that we're almost trained to be fault finders. Even as a school teacher, I was a school teacher for 1 year. That's where I know why all the people who sit in the back, especially in the corners, they're all the naughty kids. See the naughty kids laughing now. They're not naughty kids. As a school teacher, the naughtiest kid in my class, he was the only one who, once I became a monk, sent me a letter, "How are you going?" He wasn't naughty, he was highly intelligent. And that was kind of an eye-opener for me. That sometimes, even as a school teacher, I was just too brainwashed to look for faults. And that doesn't work. So, a lot of times for the students, you try to always build them up. That's amazing what you've done. You really understood that. Congratulations. Your scores are improving. They're now 2% out of 2 out of 100 instead of 1 out of 100. You're making progress. Well done. In other words, when you encourage people, then they feel better, you feel better, and they do improve much more easily. That's why one of my favorite comments, so much so that sometimes that people imitate me, and they say, if you want to look at some AI production, trying to imitate Ajahn Brahm, you'd always find it says, "Very good, carry on." I say that very often. Very good. Carry on. That's my English translations, sort of Apamadena Sampadeta, the Buddha's last words. Strive on with diligence. I say, very good, carry on. Which one would you prefer? Strive on with diligence. That puts some pressure on you. It's like forcing you. That's why I don't like that translation very much. Okay, it's going in the book of quotations. You got one at last. Yay! So, very good. Carry on. So your meditation, how has it been so far? Carry on. Because that's also something about meditation I wanted to point out this morning. That a lot of time, if you become too critical of all the things which you didn't do, which went wrong, which you could have done, then that leaves you feeling a lack of progress in your meditation. And sometimes you think you're not getting anywhere. And I say that because that was a personal experience of mine. I was still a lay person, and I was very keen on meditating when I was really young, when I was young. And then there was a time in my life, I cannot remember where, but I was in some coffee shop somewhere and talking to this French man. And this French man said, do you meditate? I said, well, I used to meditate a lot, not so much these days. And I was a lay person this time. He said, why not? I said, well, there's other things I have to do in my life. And it's okay, but it's not going that well. And that's when he gave me this beautiful piece of advice. He said, when you meditate, every time you meditate, at the end of the meditation, just the last few minutes, ask yourself, how do I feel? Do you feel better than when you started? Do you feel more peaceful than when you started? There's something I hadn't done before for years, for weeks. I just meditate and it wasn't blissing out, so I just get up and just have a cup of tea and do some work or something. But then what he said was just so accurate and true. Actually, I was making progress. Only I never actually stopped and looked to find out. And I don't know who that guy was, but I must admit that if I found out and met him, I would actually bow to him. Because every meditation from that time on, I'd always stop at the last part of the meditation. How does my body feel? How does my mind feel? How peaceful am I? And it was always a little bit more peaceful than when I started. You could see, you could feel it, it was tangible. So because of stuff like that, you kept on meditating more and more and more. Even sometimes what you think is a bad meditation. A lot of you have been telling me during the interviews, well, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was really good, but this year, it hasn't really happened this year. You're looking at the wrong things. It's one of the reasons why I was looking at my meditation with a fault-finding mind. I was seeing all the things which weren't happening, which I expected to happen. That was why it wasn't working. So I stopped with a fault-finding mind and actually starting seeing the good things which were happening. And the good things which were happening, you can always see a lot of good things. And once I saw the good things, which are not maybe as, really, really powerfully deep meditation, but they were still good. There's still things were settling down. You're getting more mindful, more wisdom, more ideas of skillful means. It did start to work. And from that, I'm bringing up now one of these other stories, which I hope many of you have heard before, of the migrant. The migrant came to Australia He was a doctor in his home country, a very good doctor. But when he landed in Australia, they said, we don't recognise your qualifications. So he couldn't get a job as a doctor. He just got a job on a building site. And so he went to this building site and he worked so hard. And at the end of the day, he just went home. He got no pay. And he told his wife, I will really work my butt off, but they don't pay me anything. So I could just carry on, they're probably just checking you out. Next day, Tuesday, he worked really hard. Wednesday, he worked really hard. Thursday, he worked even harder, and he still didn't get paid. And he said, I'm not going to go and work anymore. Australians who just exploit sort of migrants who haven't got much support. And his wife said, please go to work on Friday. And so he had nothing else to do, so he went to work on Friday. And in the middle of the morning, the boss asked him to go into the office and gave him a big paycheck. And then he said, you can go home now if you wish, Fridays. And so he went home early. And he told his wife with a big smile, I finally found out how it works in Australia. From today on, I'm only going to go to work on Fridays. On payday. And that's what many of you may think. From today on, I'm only going to go and meditate on payday, when I get lots of bliss and joy and happiness. Of course, like everything else, you have amazing days of meditation. You also have days which is very difficult. And you find out that if you have a difficult meditation and you're not having much joy or happiness or not many nimittas or not much bliss, remember, always remember this, the paycheck is in the mail. In other words, you're building up credit. And all those amazing meditations you have are due, in part, to all those things you've thought of as difficult meditations. Do you understand? So we stop having a fault-finding mind, and we have a mind of gratitude, of also well-wishing. Thank you for dropping that book. I'm not going to find fault with you. Please don't find fault with yourself. Instead, you have a mind of gratitude. Thank you, now my hands are free. You can relax them. This is a mind of positivity. And part of that positivity, the main part of the talk today, what's the opposite of fault-finding? And part of that is a mind of understanding what mudita is. This mind of rejoicing in the good part of life. How can you rejoice in the good parts of Tuesday? Another day of meditation, another day of expecting nimittas, and one comes, and as soon as you see one, well, and it goes again, it takes another few days to get back there. Another few days of being fed up. Don't ever look like that. Remember, what's special about Tuesday? This is the first day since you came on this retreat where it's not a public holiday anymore. All your friends, 8:24 in the morning, they're struggling in the traffic to get to work, and they have all this work in front of them, and do their bosses just say how wonderful they've done at their work, or do your bosses just give you more work? Who do you work for? Me. BSWA. Do ever I give you a hard time? Okay, so you can be sort of, no, just ordinary, that you're not at work this morning. This is nice work. But you can always see something good in anything. You have this wonderful sense of the opposite of fault finding, appreciation. A mudita especially, appreciation of others and other systems, and just how it's jhana growth. Please have some mudita for jhana growth. It may not be the best meditation center in the world. It may have lots of faults with it. It may have doors in the women's toilets which keep you awake at night. Go bang, bang, bang. You may have someone in your cottage who keeps you awake in the morning. Bang, bang, bang. Or as they make a cup of tea for themselves in the middle of the night. What about snorers? Have you got a snorer in your cottage? Few years ago, we had, Bodhinyana monastery is always full up. And so one of the monks asked me that their brother was coming over from Europe and he wanted to stay in Bodhinyana monastery. They were brothers, they grew up together. Is it okay if they can stay in the monastery? I said, yeah, of course. And we checked and there was no room. So he said, well, it's okay, we grew up together, we can stay in the same room. And he said, are you sure? He said, yeah. And I said, what if one of you snores? He said, I hadn't thought of that. But then he said, what I'll do is I'll make sure I go to sleep first. Can I please tell this stupid story? I know you might feel offended, but it's a nice story. I kind of liked it. It was a story of this guy who came to Perth on one of these, big celebrations, and he could not find a room in a hotel anywhere. So he went to this one hotel and he said, look, I'm sorry, sir, but everything's booked out. But we have, one room has got 2 beds, separate beds, and one is free. But the other person in this room is such a really heavy snorer. And he snores incredibly loud. And no one has ever been able to go to sleep in that room. This man said, okay, I'll give it a try. Got nowhere else. It's better than sleeping outside. So he booked in. The other man was happy to have another person in the room. And then in the morning, when this guy checked out, he said, did you manage to get to sleep? He said, I had a wonderful sleep that night. And the person at the desk of the hotel said, that's amazing. You're the first person ever who's been able to sleep in the same room as that guy. What was your trick? So it's easy. He said, once I was in my pajamas, I went over to him, gave him a big kiss, and he stayed awake all night. And I had a lovely sleep. I'm going to get in trouble for that. But then, this monk, he can't do stuff like that. So he said what happened, he decided to make sure that he laid down and just try to get to sleep first of all. Whatever you try to do, you always fail. So his brother started sleeping. So, there's huts in Bodhinyana monastery, they're really small. His brother started snoring, and he thought, oh my goodness, I'm not going to get any sleep tonight. And this is actually not a joke, this is a really nice story. And then he always remembered Ajahn Chah's story about, it's not the noise disturbs you, it's you who disturb the noise. In other words, it's something you can do to mitigate those situations. He was a very highly educated young man before he became a monk, Once he became a monk, he even became more highly educated. I'll put that one in very quickly. And so he was listening to the sound of this snoring, and there was no way he could go to sleep because it was so loud. But then he started to reconsider the sound of the snoring. Instead of it being a noise, he started, as a young man, he was really into music. Not just like rock music or folk music, but like experimental music, like state-of-the-art music. Music which expressed the feelings of the modern generation. Music which broke all boundaries, which explored beyond the ideas of rhythm. And he started to perceive his brother's loud, discordant snoring as this experimental, state-of-the-art modern music which broke all boundaries, the sort of stuff which no one had ever performed before. Thank goodness. And it soon started appearing sonorous to him. It's amazing the type of music sometimes, the only time I really can listen to music is at funerals. Because at funerals they always play somebody's favourite music. But it's much better than that apparently. This was, really state-of-the-art, breaking all boundaries, snoring. And it started to appear sonorous to him. And he started to appreciate it. And he said that was the last thing he remembered before he woke up in the morning after a good night's sleep. He changed the perception of the snoring from something which was discordant and disturbing to something which was actually beautiful. He changed it from a fault-finding mind to something which he could appreciate. And that can be how you overcome sounds of people who make a cup of tea in the morning at 2 a.m. by changing one's perceptions. For what is this person doing this time of the morning? Disturbing everybody. To say, oh, isn't that wonderful? This person has got lots of energy today and has got up early and is making themselves a nice cup of tea. Oh, I feel so happy that they're going to get a nice boost of energy this morning. That's kind of mudita, rejoicing in other person's happiness. And when you can do stuff like that, you find it so easy not to be disturbed, not to find fault, but to find something beautiful in life, which helps in meditation. That's actually why I'm giving the talk on mudita. A lot of times people get negative, but this time you get really inspired. One of those retreats, I've told a story many times, but it was actually pointing out another part of meditation. This time I'm going to point out this story and how mudita took hold in the audience. This guy came to one of these retreats in Sydney. He was not a Buddhist. I don't think he was even a Christian. He was just dying of cancer. And he just came on the retreat, as he said, a last throw of the dice. Maybe it could work, maybe it didn't. He had sinus cancer. And he was the guy who came on this retreat and was so noisy. It was like he was snoring all the time without being asleep. That's only for like 3 breaths. Imagine that went on all the time, even during the talks, in the meditation. And other people might be laughing or groaning at the jokes, and he was just going, because he couldn't breathe, through his nose. Only breathe through his mouth, and even that with difficulty. And that's why the question time had half the questions were exactly the same. Can you please ask people to breathe quietly? It was my fault, because I should have announced to people, this person is dying. He's got this big tumor in his sinuses, and he can't breathe. He's giving a try to be able to get some meditation. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but he's giving it a try. And this is the best he can do. And as soon as I made that announcement, there's no more complaints. They didn't have fault-finding mind anymore. That is beautiful mind of kindness, of mudita, happy that he was giving this meditation a go. No one complained, even though it was really noisy. And of course, I think you all know what happened in the end. Nothing. At the end of the retreat, he was still making lots of noise. But once we finished the retreat, then things happened. That was when he came running up to me. And he said, Ajahn Brahm, Ajahn Brahm. I was actually in the car, about to go to Sydney Airport to come back to Perth. And he said, last meditation a few moments ago, I heard a popping sound in my nose. I could breathe again, but only for 1 minute, then it closed up. I love telling that story because it gives me so much joy. But at the time I thought, no, he left it a bit too late. It's like, doing your, looking through your books just 1 hour before the exam. You left it a bit late in life. But 6 months later, I remember going back to Sydney, another venue, and this guy came up to me. He looked nothing like this guy who was on this retreat with sinus cancer. He came up to me and said, do you remember me? Please don't do that to me. And these days, I have a nice retort. When you come up and say, do you remember me? I say, oh yeah, you're the lady whose name I keep forgetting. It sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't. And then he announced he was that guy. When you're dying, just you lose all your muscle thickness, you look like you haven't eaten for weeks. And you feel, because you're so sickly and so weak, you look like it's totally different than when you go into full remission. I said, look, I can't recognize you. You look totally different than that guy I taught meditation to. And he said, yes, but I am the same guy. I carried on. Many pops later, the cancer went into full remission. But that's not the main point of that story. I brought that story up again simply because once a person knew that all that noise was not because he was trying to disturb people, but that was actually how he was healing himself and giving himself life. And the amount of compassion which the people in the retreat gave was really inspiring. Once over at Nollamara, you haven't asked yet, I'm surprised no one's asked, can you meditate laying down? Of course you can. I call that flat-out meditation. But I can remember that's meditating, that's one thing. But listening to a talk. So one evening over in Nollamara, when the meditation started, there was one lady and she lay down and she was pointing her feet at the Buddha statue and started snoring. And other people tried to wake her up. And I scolded them afterwards. I said, that lady, in many Buddhist temples, whichever way you point your feet, there's so many Buddhas in the room, it's bound to point your foot at one Buddha somewhere. And I said, and also, the reason, don't find fault with that woman, the reason why she was laying down, she told me she was a victim of domestic violence. And she got some nice advice, but she also wanted friendship. And if you've been through any of those situations of extreme domestic violence, you can't sleep. And so she came to our Nodamara center, and one of the first times she felt safe. She lay down because one of the first sleeps she had in weeks. When people woke her up, oh crikey, don't do that again, please. Have some mudita. She's having a rest. She's peaceful. She's actually sleeping. Don't think of yourself and your meditation as being disturbed. Think that lady victim of domestic violence is having a peaceful time. She's asleep at last. She feels friendship. She feels safe. So that's one of the rules. I tell people, okay, if you're just indulging, but you don't really know why people do things. So don't criticize them for falling asleep. Sometimes people haven't had a sleep for weeks. It's the opposite of fault finding. And when usually you find out the full story, and you let her sleep, people actually feel some joy. It worked. You just sacrificed a little bit of silence, but instead you had this beautiful energy of joy that your giving had allowed someone to have a nice rest, who really, really needed it. Just like this, another story comes up on the same kind of points. There was a Sri Lankan monk many years ago, and he was a very good monk, but like many monks, we often go to give blood, to donate blood. I remember just going so regularly when I was over in Nodamara temple, and it was only afterwards, when I started traveling a lot, and they said, oh, well, look, it's a bit difficult to take your blood because you've been to these countries where it maybe not be that healthy. So I stopped giving it. Instead I give my blood to the Buddhist Society of Western Australia. I think you know what I mean. But know that I always remember just this Sri Lankan monk, when you give your blood, you also, asked if you want to be an organ donor. I still got my organ donor card somewhere in my bag. So if anyone want one of my organs, most happy to have it. What do you think would happen if, they have a brain transplant and they give part of my brain to some kid who really needs it? Do you think that kid would also tell bad jokes afterwards? So anyway, this monk, he was called up by the blood bank and said, we found a match. Your kidneys are healthy, but this person actually needs a kidney. And I said, of course, you can have one of mine. And then they said, this person who needs your kidney is a born-again Christian pastor converting so many Buddhists to being Christian. You still want to give it? Of course, what are you talking about? Someone needs it. It's up to them. And so he gave his kidney to this pastor. And somebody in the newspapers heard about it and made a big article about him. And that's how sort of religious people should behave. We don't care If someone needs it, they can have it. But then the problem is, for him, he had to go and disappear in the forest for a few months because there's too many people were revering him just for an ordinary reason of just being a donor, giving. He was saying, well, even his kidneys, like even my organs, who owns them? Who owns my brain? Who owns my lungs? Who owns my kidneys? Who owns my stomach especially? You do. You're the ones who feed it. And sometimes I always feel it's not just opening the door of your heart, it's also opening the door of my mouth so you can put food in it. And that's some of the reasons why for a lot of times you say, eat this, it's really good for you. And I do it, and it makes me sick. So I never tell you. Because it's the joy of your doing and giving. And so a lot of times that's what sharing actually means. So instead of being critical and fault-finding, you always have another attitude of mudita. Someone's worked really hard to give you this. So I have to take it. I have to eat it. That's a kind of a beautiful way of looking at life. And one thing I did find, for most of the time, if you do have that mind of mudita, rejoicing in other people's goodness, sometimes you get such a boost of energy. If it is something which will make other people sick, it doesn't make you sick. That mudita, that joy, is one of the most important parts of health. If you are fault-finding all the time, you can find fault everywhere. Doesn't matter who the cook is. Doesn't matter what the food is. And I often mention to some of the foods which I've eaten in the past, they should have killed me. Some of the food I've eaten, the boiled frogs on sticky rice, it would have been a bit more delightful if they had any, even like garlic or salt or pepper or something. It was like boiled, like it had fallen into a pot by itself. And frog soup, ant soup, used to have ant soup. I was told about this beforehand, that you don't think that the ants have kind of got into the food and they've fallen in the soup. No, actually they harvest the ants and they put it in the soup and boil it up and serve it to you. Whatever crawled, you had to eat. That was in a region of northeast Thailand years ago, where it was just how to survive. So it was pretty gross. But sometimes I always remembered if you had like frog soup, they'd always give you the best frogs. You were monks. And so they'd keep the worst frogs to themselves and give you the best. I hate to think what the worst frogs look like. But that was the kind of kindness. And so you had like mudita for them. This beautiful sense of joy. They were doing the best they possibly could. And it took a lot of understanding to change one's attitudes. One of the first months we started Wat Ba Nana Chat. There's only 6 of us started it off. And I remember just one day we were going to a house for a house dana. And when we went to that house dana, we decided, well, there's not much point going on alms round that morning, because all of us were going to this house dana. And I thought, personally, that meant the villagers didn't have to feed us that day. So they could take a rest, take a break, and have more food for themselves. Kind of how wrong I was. We never went on the alms round, we went to the house for the dana, and when we came back in the afternoon, there was a delegation from the village visited us. And they said, we come up here to apologize to you. Apologize? Why? And he said, you never came to our village for alms this morning. We must have upset you. We're really, really terribly sorry. Whatever it was, we forgive you. Also, we ask forgiveness, and we ask that you come tomorrow. They actually wanted us to come on alms round. They wanted us to give us the best frogs. And actually, it changed my attitude to what actually even giving is. It's the opportunity to do something beautiful and wonderful and see the beautiful results of it. It's not just what you can get, but what you can give. That was one of the other things of meditation, which supported deep meditation. For years as a young monk, I did always have a kind streak to me. I don't just build monasteries, that I decided to help out with the monks' visas. And I was smart, I could learn how to write Thai and to write it properly. So I volunteered to do their visas for them. So, I could take down the details of their passports, and I would fill out the forms and take them down to Bangkok to get their visas renewed. So they didn't have to disturb their meditation practice. So they're up in the caves, in the forests, nice beautiful places, they could have some solitude, and I'd do their visas for them. And what surprised me, even though I was more busy than they were, my meditation was better than theirs. They would discuss. And when they came to sign their forms at any convenient time, so discuss how meditation was. It was something I found so difficult to understand at first. I think the answer came to me, not came to me, but was really obvious, when some of the young monks, in those days, if you were a monk, ordaining as a monk in Thailand, then you have to make your own set of robes. And by making your own set of robes means like with white cloth, cutting it out and sewing it, which is a lot of work, and then making the natural dye from the wood of a jackfruit tree, which meant a lot of hoarding of water. There was no water pipes. You'd hoard it from the well, and then boiling the water, chipping up these slivers of jackfruit wood, boiling it and boiling it and boiling it, and getting the sap out of the jackfruit wood, and then concentrating it, and then actually putting it on the white cloth and just beating it with your hands until you actually got enough of the dye out to dye your robe. And when you were drying the robe, you always had to be there, because otherwise the dye would streak. Keep on moving it, moving it, and moving it. And then you used to have to dye it 2 or 3 times before the dye took. It was a long, hard work. And there was these 3 monks were making their robes for their ordination. They'd already been up for 2 nights in a row. And so after one evening, the evening meeting, I went to the dyeing shed and I said to them, you must be really, really tired. And my goodness, they were. I said, look, I know how to dye robes. Now, this is against the monastic rules. But I said, forget about that. I won't tell anybody. Let me do the dyeing tonight for you. They never argued. They were off to get a few hours of sleep. So I did that dyeing for them. I was fit and I knew what I was doing. And then at 3 o'clock, when the morning bell, we used to get up at 3 o'clock there. We really indulge when we come to Jhana Grove, 4:30, 5 o'clock. But anyway, that's what I got used to. So I did all the work for them. And after the bell, they came to the dyeing shed to continue the work. But they'd had a rest. They looked so much better. And then, what do? I went to the morning meeting. Instead of having a rest myself, at 3 o'clock I heard the bell, just washed my hands and then went to the morning meditation and chanting. You've heard us chanting here, Yo so ba. That morning, Yo so bago. I couldn't help it. I had so much energy. And a few times that's happened to me. They've asked me, Ajahn Brahm, quiet please. But this was natural. I had so much energy. And then after the chanting, the meditation, I was just ramrod straight. Really nice meditation. No sloth and torpor at all. And I hadn't had a sleep, I don't know how many hours. And it was just so weird. How come when I've been up working all night and got so much energy, and on the arms round, again I was just, had to sort of make sure I was going slow enough for the others to keep up. But I was so energized, I never, that was illogical. And so I asked one of the senior monks, and they said, yes, when you help others like that, when you give, not sort of expect them to help you, but you help, you get so much energy. And they say, yeah, that's so true. If you get tired on this meditation course, if nothing is happening, go and volunteer to chop some vegetables or something. Go and volunteer to clean up something, especially in the middle of the night. You get there's so much energy coming up, and it's kind of weird. It's illogical, but because you are letting go, you're renouncing what you think is your comfort. You're helping somebody else. You get so much of a boost of energy. I see someone yawning, so that's your job tonight. Go and do something with somebody else. And you get so inspired, you get so much energy and also mudita, the happiness in other people being happy. Then you have a beautiful boost to your meditation. It's not just caffeine type happiness, it's deep inside the heart happiness. So that's how it can sometimes work. That's just what I've experienced. You notice any meditation, even what you think is bad meditation, it's always good meditation. You always learn something, and you're always more peaceful than you were before. Not as much as you expect, but there's something there. You're getting, slowing down, becoming still. And you soon, really, the meditation really starts to take off. Does that make any sense? Thank you. That's at the end of the talk, I ask you, was that a good talk? And I believe you more than I believe myself. Thank you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Is doing sadhus, does that give you energy? Okay. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you. I don't know why more teachers don't do that. Imagine at school, after doing maths. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay. I'll behave.